Ladies and gentlemen, hello again, and welcome to today's Partner Infopedia web conference. This is the U.S. Office 365 Partner Community Call for March of 2015. Today, you are going to be hearing an overview of SharePoint and Office 365. So I would like to introduce your Microsoft host today, Michael Panzaroli, who is a partner technology strategist at Microsoft. Michael, you now have the floor.
Well, thank you, Deb. And on behalf of the National Partner Technology Strategist team, welcome everybody to the March call. And if you've been joining our calls, you know that we have monthly themes, and last month was OneDrive for Business, and this month our focus is on hybrid Office 365. And on our call today, we're very privileged to have Bill Baer with us, and he's presenting an overview of hybrid SharePoint and Office 365. Bill is a senior product marketing manager, and he's a keynote speaker, and he's also going to be presenting and training at the upcoming Ignite conference. So his perspective and insight is going to be very valuable for partners. So we hope to have a few minutes left to answer any questions that you have in the Q&A window. And before we get started, just a few ways to be able to join our community that's focused on Office 365. You'll find information on building your Office 365 cloud practice and other useful information on the service, training, and other resources. So you can sign up for the newsletter, which comes out about the middle of the month, and you can also join our Yammer group, which is part of the U.S. partner community, and the monthly call series with links shown above. And also you can read our posts on our monthly focus at the U.S. partner community blog. On the blog, you can find our first blog post on hybrid and other articles on Office 365 and also Azure. And so thank you again for joining, and with that, I'm going to turn it over to Bill. Bill, welcome, and thank you again for presenting today.
Absolutely. Thank you very much, Michael. It's a pleasure to be with you here this morning and talk a little bit about hybrid and some of the direction that we envision taking both SharePoint and Office 365 moving forward. We have quite a bit of content to cover today and not quite as much time to cover it, so I'm going to move fast. Please bear with me. Fortunately, the materials are available for download later for you to review in the event that we don't manage to cover all of the topics. I'm Bill Baer. I'm a product manager here in our SharePoint product group in Redmond. I've been with SharePoint now for about 14 years, since early Tahoe days, which evolved into Team Services and Portal Server 2001. Largely half of my career was spent as an engineer in our SharePoint organization prior to moving to our business organization, where I can focus more on strategic investments and influencing the product moving forward. Today, we'll talk a little bit about cloud momentum, the hybrid cloud in general, some of the considerations from a foundational aspect as related to identity, and then a workload support perspective. And as much as possible throughout the course of the presentation, I'll try to embed a narrative that also talks a little bit about how we see hybrid evolving over the course of the next 18 months, which will lead into Ignite, where we'll be able to share more of our detailed investment areas. So to think about what the cloud means today, effectively the cloud has moved mainstream. It's become the new black, and there's massive partner opportunities from a cloud computing perspective. One of the key metrics to think about on this slide is over on the far right-hand side, which is effectively that 72% of customers today are using the cloud in some shape, way, or form for their applications, whether that's pilots or production apps. And when you think about hybrid with SharePoint and Office 365, there's a number of different technologies that come into play, be it Hyper-V in Windows Azure, be it Office 365 and a traditional bare metal deployment of SharePoint. So there's a number of different ways to envision hybrid in the way that customers can consume SharePoint technologies from the cloud. Most importantly, if you think about some of the metrics that are driving hybrid and some of the predictions that we're seeing from an industry perspective, almost 50% of our large enterprises in some way are going to have a hybrid deployment by 2017. And from a customer IT budget allocation, if you look at the numbers for this fiscal year, our customers are largely banking on hybrid as being their solution to move forward, whereas just a small minority is representative of traditional pure on-premises investments from a fiscal perspective. So from an on-premises perspective, we're seeing about 38% of customers investing wholly in that particular aspect of computing, whereas 62% is representative of some form of hybrid. That could be software as a service, platform as a service, infrastructure as a service, either outsourcing services or even co-location. So hybrid is commonly an overloaded term, at least from an industry perspective. But when you think about it from a SharePoint perspective, we're largely talking about the unique relationship between our product and the Office 365 service. From an overview perspective, I just want to take a few minutes to talk about kind of the three core tenets of computing that we see today, which are comprised of traditional non-virtualized deployments, private cloud deployments, and public cloud deployments, such as software platform as a service. Some of the key scenarios that we see our customers implementing across these three tenets are the traditional virtualized, non-virtualized, and private cloud deployments are largely defined by a necessity to maintain corporate or regulatory compliance. The customer may have data sensitivity concerns, or they may have a significant investment in customization that really relegates them to remain, at least to a certain extent, on premises. From a public cloud perspective, the tendency seems to be taking ideation to an application very rapidly. The public cloud facilitates that need very easily. In other cases, we see that necessity for a variable demand in bursts and low latency scenarios. So you can think about SharePoint as a web content management layer that performs best from an optimization perspective in something like a hosted infrastructure like Azure Infrastructure Services, because you can scale on demand or you can contract on demand based on your business needs. What we envision hybrid doing is effectively tying together these three core tenets of computing across the traditional non-virtualized solutions all the way through the public cloud. And that could be cloud applications with on-premises data sources accessible via business connectivity services. It could be a relationship to some of our new investments in data connectivity, such as the SAP Gateway for Microsoft, or it could be extending an application to the cloud, provisioning new team sites in the cloud, and then providing unified discovery through hybrid search with SharePoint. Most customers look at a couple of different business needs from a hybrid computing perspective. Today, the traditional non-virtualized deployment, the total cost of ownership, both capital and operational expenditures, is relatively low due to the cost of procuring hardware, racking that hardware, QAing that hardware, and then from a long-term maintenance perspective, optimizing the total use of that hardware. In many cases where we see a traditional non-virtualized deployment with SharePoint, the tendency is that the machines aren't operating at peak efficiency. So from a load perspective, you're not getting the value out of that physical machine. To contrast, private clouds from a Hyper-V solution-based perspective, you can optimize utilization of those resources from a SharePoint perspective, which increases your TCO. And then obviously from a TCO perspective, you have the best opportunity from a public cloud perspective because you're abstracting a lot of the infrastructure and focusing more on the software itself as opposed to the hardware. From time to solution, both for new and existing deployments, from a private cloud and public cloud perspective, obviously those are optimized for quickly provisioning a new deployment because you've abstracted a lot of the components that tend to add time to the overall provisioning process. From an applications need perspective, the public cloud, whether it's IaaS, Office 365, or a PaaS solution, offer the most scale from a bursting perspective because that infrastructure can be scaled up or scaled down on demand. Now, where we envision hybrid cloud coming into this picture from a core tenets of computing perspective, those three core tenets, is we want to be able to tie together those tenets through what we call a set of commons. And those commons are typically identified by the foremost foundational aspect of a hybrid deployment, which is the identity, that information that the user brings with them that identifies who they are. We also want to extend that to common development tools, and we've been doing a lot of that work from a SharePoint and Office 365 perspective over the course of the last 3 years. So effectively really relying on Windows PowerShell is becoming that core operational asset for managing a SharePoint environment, whether it's SharePoint Online or SharePoint and Office 365. So tying those two distinct entities together, or those two discrete entities together, through a common management solution. The all-up picture effectively takes into account not only the business necessities that an organization may have, their application needs, as well as the key scenarios, but really hybrid fits into that overall picture, binds them together through that set of comments. So a lot of customers ask us, why should I embark on a hybrid journey versus a pure cloud or a pure on-premises journey? Now, the cloud as a wholesale proposition is an excellent solution for customers that may have no history in SharePoint, or may be looking for a new solution that they can rapidly deploy for either collaborative or content management needs. For our existing traditional on-premises customers who have long-term investments in SharePoint, there's a lot of issues that may preclude them from moving to the cloud as a wholesale proposition. Those may be the investment in on-premises customization that can't be transitioned to the cloud app model, or those on-premises customizations may drive business processes that can't be shut down in favor of moving to a cloud app model. They may have significant investments in remote locations, and that's a perfect opportunity from a hybrid computing perspective. So in many cases, customers want to put their data centers closest to their user bases. Or customers may have geo-distributed users, and in many cases, they're piloting small SharePoint environments in those geos in order to facilitate collaboration and mitigate bandwidth and latency constraints. So in this case, the opportunity to tie together a corporate SharePoint deployment with a non-traditional cloud-based deployment enables those users access to technology without incurring that data center footprint that you may commonly see with those geographic deployments. It also mitigates the need for a lot of the disaster recovery solutions that come along with it. So from a hybrid perspective, you can reduce the data center footprint, but yet put infrastructure closer to the user base that may require it in those geographically distributed locations. Another reason for hybrid is that you may be constrained by corporate or regulatory compliance. You may have data sensitivity concerns, or you may have concerns related to customization. So from a regulatory perspective, hybrid is a way to enable you to continue to meet those obligations that you have on premises while being able to offer solutions in the cloud to facilitate the needs of your users. And most of our customers today are in some way, shape, or form on the way to the cloud, either as a wholesale proposition or through hybrid. Now, the way that we think about hybrid today in SharePoint 2013 and in Office 365 is largely those hybrid investments were designed to mitigate a migration pain point. So from a migration perspective, as customers began the first steps of moving from their on-premises investments to Office 365, one of the first things that they experienced was this idea that they had two distinct data silos that had no affinity between each other. So they had an on-premises investment and an Office 365 tenant. They were performing migration and then realized what they had were two distinct data silos. And again, those silos had no affinity to one another. So in SharePoint 2013, we invested in a number of different technologies to enable reduction of those pain points around the existing hybrid scenarios. So some of those investments were server-to-server authentication, obviously with a dependency on OAuth, from a protocol perspective in order to tie the two technologies together. And what we did to address those two silos was we implemented hybrid search. And the hybrid search experience today is based on this concept of what we call federated search. Effectively, a user composes a query, and that query is distributed across those two silos, and then the result sets returned in a unified search interface. However, the important constraint is that result set is two separate result sets. So they're refined independently and presented independently, so there's no affinity between the results. But that was our first step forward in resolving some of the migration concerns when customers were moving to Office 365 from their existing SharePoint investments. We also enabled data connectivity from Office 365 to on-premises data sources by virtue of business connectivity services, again, taking dependency on that OAuth infrastructure to drive those scenarios. More recently, in Service Pack 1, we introduced some investments that enabled our customers to offer their users data mobility through OneDrive for Business and Office 365, and then bind those solutions together with hybrid search from a federated query perspective. We also enabled the opportunity to redirect sites and pages to Office 365. So when users are provisioning new sites and pages via an on-premises deployment, those new sites and pages would be deployed in Office 365. And again, hybrid search is what pulls the two silos together from a unified discovery perspective. The moral of the story is the way that hybrid was designed in SharePoint 2013, again, was largely to mitigate some of the pain and challenge around wholesale migration to Office 365. They were all about mitigating some of the issues around data migration. As we move forward with hybrid and SharePoint Server 2016, our focus isn't going to be on pursuing hybrid as a means to enable migration, as much as we're pursuing hybrid as a means to bring cloud innovation back down to the business. So an easy way to think about these two tenets is that the first construct was about bringing your business to the cloud. That's the existing hybrid scenario. The new hybrid scenarios in Office 365 and SharePoint Server 2016 will be about bringing the cloud back to your business. So we understand that our customers will remain on premises for the foreseeable future. We also understand that they do have constraints that relegate them to remain on premises, coming back to those compliance concerns and those data sensitivity concerns. The way that we see it is we're okay with them pursuing those traditional SharePoint investments on premises, but we want to enable them to enrich those investments with cloud innovation. So it's not about transitioning data across your firewall to Office 365 as much as it's about bringing our cloud innovation back to your existing content and then enriching the experiences for your end user. So effectively, it's continuing to maintain a hybrid model and consume cloud innovation, continuing to use your existing on-premises customizations, and enriching traditional investments with cloud innovation. An example of which is the Office Graph in Delve. Today, it's an experience that we deliver completely in Office 365. And the Delve experience is defined by content that's stored in Office 365, be it OneDrive for Business, be it the video portal, be it Yammer or email attachments, but it's largely driven by Office 365 centric content. Our vision for the Office Graph and Delve from a hybrid perspective is that your on-premises content should be available to the Office Graph for signal processing and predictive analytics and machine learning, but you shouldn't have to transition that content to Office 365 in order to gain advantage of that capability. So effectively, in that scenario, the content remains on premises. The signals related to that content, effectively metadata, is parsed by the Office Graph in Office 365, and the Delve experience is presented to the users by virtue of their Delve navigation facility. So effectively, your content remains within your control and within your boundaries. So that's one example of how we see cloud innovation coming back to the on-premises data center without having to move the on-premises data center to Office 365. So we have kind of today's implementation of hybrid and tomorrow's implementation of hybrid. Regardless of how hybrid's implemented, the one thing that won't change is identity. Identity is the foundation of hybrid scenarios. It effectively defines what the end user experience will look like. What we have today are three distinct solutions for identity. We have a cloud-based identity, which has no affinity to your on-premises Active Directory implementation. We have directory and password synchronization, and then we have federated identity. And the way that we pursue these is as a step-up model. You can pilot an experience by leveraging cloud identity. You can then move to directory and password synchronization as you begin to expand that pilot or as you begin to want to enhance the user experience. And then you can move into a wholesale federated identity solution by virtue of ADFS and single sign-on, with directory and password synchronization being the foundational layer for that experience. Cloud identity is purely based on Azure Active Directory, which was designed and implemented to extend your on-premises Active Directory. It can provide a single sign-on experience, and it's the core tenet which enables us to provide multi-factor authentication through the services that we provide through Office 365. But the important thing to understand about cloud identity is it is a distinct identity for your users with no affinity to your existing Active Directory. The only affinity that exists between that cloud identity and Office 365, the only common between those two is the aspect of Active Directory in Azure. From a directory synchronization perspective, effectively what it does is it integrates with Azure Active Directory by replicating your on-prem users, groups, and contacts to Azure Active Directory. And it provides a facility by which your users can access online services using their corporate credentials. It doesn't provide a single sign-on experience. What it does provide is a same sign-on experience. And by same sign-on, that means when a user accesses a cloud-based facility from on-premises, they're prompted to provide credentials. Those credentials would be their corporate credentials. However, there will be a credential prompt. The benefit of password synchronization with directory synchronization is that it is a low barrier to entry, and it reduces your overall time to solution because it doesn't necessitate the need for a complex infrastructure, much like ADFS does. And there's no changes that you would have to make to your existing identity infrastructure. Effectively, it's a replication client that takes the users, groups, and contacts, as well as their password hash, from Active Directory on premises to Azure Active Directory, providing that same sign-on experience, which again requires some additional authentication. From an ADFS perspective, when we move into that, that provides the best and most optimal solution for your users because it's an open and interoperable claims model. So it supports a lot of the multi-factor authentication solutions that you may choose to implement when users are accessing cloud-based or even on-premises-based resources, but it also provides a single sign-on experience because the identity is federated between the two endpoints. So moving beyond identity, the other important aspect of a hybrid environment is those infrastructure considerations. And those infrastructure considerations come into play regardless of implementing today's hybrid scenarios or future hybrid scenarios. So a couple of things that we have is in our infrastructure is one, a reverse proxy device, depending on the type of infrastructure you choose to implement. If it's an inbound or bidirectional topology, you'll have to implement a reverse proxy device unless you're publishing your SharePoint infrastructure directly to the internet. And effectively, its purpose is for pre-authentication purposes as well as retrieving resources on behalf of the client. We've documented a number of different reverse proxy solutions, UAG and TMG, Web Application Proxy, Big IP, as well as Citrix NetScaler. All of those solutions we've validated here at Microsoft to ensure that they work with an Office 365 and SharePoint hybrid environment. Again, the reverse proxy is required only in those inbound and bidirectional scenarios. We don't require a reverse proxy for outbound hybrid scenarios. And now that we've gotten to that point to where we're talking about scenarios and infrastructure, that's what we call our topology considerations. So if you recall, a reverse proxy is required for an inbound and bidirectional topology. It's not required for an outbound topology. Outbound topologies are defined by those topologies through which, for example, let's look at search. The search experience is defined purely on premises, which means a user using an on-premises search portal will be capable of retrieving results from both online and on premises. Conversely, in Office 365, that search portal will only return results from the online investment. In an inbound topology, it's just the opposite. In the inbound topology, the reverse proxy is required to retrieve resources for pre-authentication purposes. And also from an inbound topology perspective, this is where a user can search on-premises investments from the Office 365 Search Center. So in Office 365 and SharePoint Online, they're capable of composing a query and returning results from both the online and on-prem investments. Conversely, on-prem, they're only capable of returning on-prem results within their search experience. Now, the reason for these two distinct topologies, outbound and inbound, is they're largely differentiated by where you anticipate the majority of content to reside. So from a search perspective, if you anticipate the majority of content to reside on premises, then an outbound topology is the most effective topology from a discovery perspective. If you anticipate that the majority of content would reside online, then an inbound topology will provide the optimal user experience. If you're choosing to implement a long-term hybrid deployment that's inclusive of a migration phase, where there'll be a constant transition of data between on-premises and online, then a bidirectional topology would provide the optimal user experience. From a bidirectional topology perspective, again, one of which requires a reverse proxy device, users can search across both online and on-premises investments, regardless of where that search is executed. So effectively, you have two unidirectional topologies that are really dictated by where you anticipate content to reside from a majority perspective with inbound and outbound, and you have a bidirectional topology through which data can be discovered regardless of where a search is executed. From a topology perspective, as we move forward with our hybrid investments, those that bring innovation back to the data center, many of these topology constraints will remain as well. And in many cases, there'll be a requirement to step up to a bidirectional topology as we begin to formalize some of the investments that we're making moving forward from a SharePoint perspective. From a workload perspective, talking a little bit about what we have today available in our current state, one of the things that we've heard all the way back as early as 2012 is that one of the most important characteristics to customers was the ability to migrate workloads between on-premises and their cloud-based investments. So we performed a number of different actions from a technology perspective in order to facilitate that need. So to think about where we're at with search today. Today you have search on-premises, and that's comprised of content that's gathered through crawling local sites, file shares, perhaps third-party platforms, or even open web-based platforms through the Open Search Protocol. So there's a number of ways to extrapolate a result set from a search perspective, leveraging the on-premises search experience. We also have search in SharePoint Online. Search in SharePoint Online is inclusive only of content that's stored in local sites in SharePoint Online. So there is no affinity between your online search and any existing on-prem investments or third-party data repositories or file shares or open search locations. The intent of hybrid search was to provide an optimal experience across the two. So from a hybrid search perspective, not only do you have visibility into the content that's stored online through SharePoint Online search, but you also have the breadth of search available to you from an on-premises perspective, that which is inclusive of local sites, file shares, and a number of different other facilities that you may choose as part of your crawl pattern. So hybrid search effectively pulls together those two and provides unified discovery into content, albeit with the limitation that that unified discovery is based on the premise of federated query. Your authentication topology, the topologies we talked about a few minutes ago, really are what dictates the search experience. Again, the inbound topology, designed to perform and execute searches from online back to on-prem, outbound from on-prem to online, and bidirectional, regardless of where the search is executed, the result set's inclusive of all the locations defined by the hybrid topology. We also invested in data connectivity through business connectivity services in SharePoint Online, which enables users to publish on-premises data or lists to SharePoint Online through either an external content type or through an external list. You can then federate that information to invite external parties to participate from a collaborative perspective on that information that's defined by an external data source. It requires two-way authentication topology, either using a URL published by the reverse proxy, or not recommended, but optionally, you could also publish your existing investment directly to the internet. The requirement here is that it only connects through an OData data source. So if the data source that you're choosing to target is not compatible, you can build what we call an OData service head, which effectively provides a proxy between the business connectivity services investment in Office 365, and then lastly, your on-premises data source, which could be a SQL server Perhaps it's JD Edwards, PeopleSoft, or some third-party data store that you want to extract information from and make it inclusive of your online investment, making it internet accessible for your users, in addition to the ability to federate that information a little further. As I mentioned, the next step was investing in OneDrive for Business as part of our Service Pack 1 investments that we released last year in February and early March. Right around this time a year ago, we made some investments to enhance the OneDrive for Business experience for users. Now, OneDrive for Business obviously is an evolution of technologies, beginning as early as 2003 with the construct of the personal site, which evolved into the My Site, subsequently renamed to SkyDrive Pro, and then further renamed to OneDrive for Business. The key differentiator throughout that evolution has been the introduction of the sync client that enables anywhere, anytime, cross-device access to information. So one of the things that we've heard from users is OneDrive for Business is great on premises, but I have to either be VPN'd into my corporate network from a synchronization perspective. It has to either have a published URL to the internet, or I have to be using direct access. And I just want pure connectivity from a mobile device perspective, or if I'm at a kiosk device. So what we did is with Office 365 and OneDrive for Business, we enabled on-prem customers to redirect either wholesale or selectively users to Office 365 as part of the service. So effectively redirecting OneDrive for Business is kind of the first step in setting up users to start using data mobility in Office 365. So the user's data storage exists in Office 365. From a synchronization perspective, their target is Office 365, but the remainder of the way that they engage with SharePoint is on premises. So effectively, we're just redirecting a facet of their experience to Office 365. If the team sites are an option to redirect to Office 365, or pages are an option to redirect for Office 365, we've also enabled you to selectively enable that option as well. So not only will users be redirected to Office 365 for data storage and data mobility by virtue of OneDrive for Business, but they can also provision new team sites and pages in Office 365 as well. And the best bet at this point then would be to unify those experiences through hybrid search with a bidirectional topology, because now your users have the discovery they need to locate information across both facilities. They can do team-centric collaboration on premises, and they have people-centric and data mobility options available to them through OneDrive for Business and Office 365. But all of those investments have an affinity to one another by virtue of identity, either directory synchronization and password sync, or even ADFS and SSO, but also through discovery by virtue of hybrid search. And in the event that business data becomes a requirement of that experience, that's where business connectivity services can come in to facilitate that need as well. We also realizing that the cloud, again, is not a wholesale proposition, and you may want to selectively begin to provision and pilot experiences. We added that selectivity to OneDrive for Business redirection in Service Pack 1. So the way that works is you can create a security group in your on-premises Active Directory. You can establish a set of defined users that you want to redirect to the cloud as members of that security group. That security group then becomes the basis for an audience as part of your user profile experience with on-premises SharePoint. That audience can be compiled, and that audience can be the driver for who gets redirected to OneDrive for Business and Office 365, and which users don't get redirected to OneDrive for Business and Office 365. In many scenarios, you may have research and development personnel that the organization may not want their data to exist in the cloud. Again, coming back to corporate regulatory compliance. Those users can remain on premises, and people-centric collaboration can be facilitated by OneDrive for Business as part of their existing on-premises infrastructure. But for the sales personnel who are remote and mobile that need data mobility, those users can be redirected to Office 365, which provides a seamless experience between their on-prem and online investments. Lastly, from a social perspective, you have a number of different opportunities from a social perspective. We have two core social offerings as part of the overall SharePoint system. One is the existing integrated SharePoint Social, which we invested in SharePoint 2013. The other is Yammer, which we acquired shortly after the introduction of SharePoint 2013. From a social perspective, having both experiences results in two different data silos. So the hybrid search experience is not inclusive of Yammer content. So if social becomes a cloud-based opportunity for you and you're leveraging Yammer, the important thing to understand is one of the hybrid search constraints today is that Yammer experience, those conversations and content created in that facility, won't be included in the result set that hybrid search encompasses. So you have to understand that it's going to result in a data silo from a today's experience perspective when you begin to integrate cloud-based social with an on-premises platform. We've been working over time to tie those two investments together. From an identity perspective, we've been working on unifying the identity infrastructure to where a single identity provides a facility for interacting with both Yammer and Office 365. And the other investments that we've made is we've moved beyond the web part, which we introduced to integrate Yammer with your existing on-premises investments from a SharePoint-based perspective, and we've moved to the new Yammer embed technology to provide a more seamless experience for your on-premises users and team sites by integrating that social layer a little bit better. So from a roadmap perspective, one of the things that I talked about very early on in the presentation is that on-premises, SharePoint's value is defined by the sum of all of its parts. In many cases, it's composed of not only the workloads that it provides, be it business intelligence, enterprise content management, enterprise search, enterprise social computing, perhaps web content management, but effectively it's defined by the sum of a number of different parts, the workloads being one of those. Applications are the other one. Those applications can be just pure SharePoint extensibility or the ability for SharePoint on premises to interop with a number of different platforms, as well as the compliance and management facilities that SharePoint on premises provides. So again, on premises is really the sum of all of its parts, and that's where the customers find value in an on-premises deployment. But for those customers, they felt left behind due to the innovation occurring in Office 365, and particularly with video, with Delve in the Office Graph, with OneDrive for Business, and a number of different investments that we've made over the course of the last 18 months in Office 365. So increasingly, we've had customers say, I feel left behind on premises, but I enjoy my on-premises investment because it gives me the compliance that I need. It gives me the flexibility that I need from a customization perspective because it's very extensible and it's not constrained by an app model that doesn't support particular actions or functions. And also there's various workloads that we like to tie together. So business intelligence in combination with enterprise content management, or enterprise search as a layer on top of not only the existing SharePoint content, but content stored in repositories outside of SharePoint. In Office 365, SharePoint evolves in a different way. So, we've received a lot of data from customers that looking at Office 365 and looking at SharePoint Online, there's this perception that the SharePoint Online brand is going away. What's happening with SharePoint Online is SharePoint Online isn't defined by the value being the sum of all of its parts. It's not delivered as a platform as part of the service. It's delivered as point solutions that were designed to address specific end user needs. So from a discovery and analytics perspective, Delve in the Office Graph. Now, on the surface, it may not seem like a SharePoint solution, but the underlying architecture is based on the concepts of fast search. OneDrive for Business is obviously the evolution of the personal site all the way from as early as 2003 up into 2010 when we labeled it as SkyDrive Pro. So it's indicative of another SharePoint capability, not delivered under the construct of a platform, but delivered as a point solution to address a specific need. From a social perspective, Yammer is representative of that. So the workloads tend to differ in Office 365. They're very targeted point solutions designed to address a need that users may have, as opposed to a collection of solutions designed to integrate together to enrich an experience. There's also cloud workloads that are based on Azure that exist outside of Office 365. And Office 365 also has a compliance and management facility for the content stored within the suite. The way that we envision hybrid evolving over the course of the next release of SharePoint, SharePoint 2016, is that hybrid shouldn't be defined by bringing content to Office 365 as much as it should be defined by bringing these point solutions back to the on-premises data center in a very integrated, blended way. So again, coming back to the Office Graph and Delve example, enabling users to continue to work with enterprise search on premises, enabling customers to continue to work with data on premises, yet enriching those experiences with the investments that we're going to make by enabling the Office Graph to process that content to provide the analytics experience and the presentation experience that it provides. So that's one of the examples of those opportunities there around how we envision that shifting. Also, from a data management perspective, the ability to leverage workloads that may exist outside of Office 365 from a hybrid perspective. So as one of those cloud tenants, Azure will become more and more of an integral part of delivering an end-to-end hybrid experience that's built on the premise of bringing the cloud back to your on-premises data center, as opposed to bringing your on-premises data center back to the cloud. So with that said, just to leave you with some key resources, and again, that gives us about 15 minutes of scheduled for Q&A. The important aspects here is as you think about the future and how we're evolving hybrid SharePoint and Office 365 as we move forward, is start shifting the conversation from the cloud being a wholesale proposition to the cloud being an opportunity to enrich your traditional on-premises investments with its innovation. So it's really about bringing the cloud to the business as opposed to bringing the business to the cloud. We also have a cloud migration assessment tool that's been designed to provide a structured methodology around having a hybrid conversation with customers that you can download via the links in this presentation. It'll guide you through a series of questions to ask customers as they begin to show interest in a hybrid computing scenario. Those responses are calculated and processed, and then it provides you a customizable report that you can provide to the organization that you're performing an assessment against that defines any risks that may exist in their hybrid strategy, as well as identifying opportunities to enrich that existing hybrid strategy. This tool will continue to evolve as we move into SharePoint 2016 as well, to be inclusive of those cloud enrichment scenarios. You can also learn more about our hybrid strategy, as well as some of our detailed investments and our roadmap at Ignite. So if you're attending Ignite, there's a number of sessions where we'll share our detailed roadmap for hybrid and the specific investments that we'll be making. Again, today's investments are largely designed to facilitate migration scenarios through search, through business connectivity services, or to provide data mobility through OneDrive for Business. As we evolve into the future, you can see more cloud innovation coming back to the on-prem data center, where the on-prem data center still retains ownership of its data. So it's not about content movement across the data center as much as it is about the innovation crossing the perimeter network and back into the data center. So you'll learn more about that at Ignite, as well as the detailed investments. We have interactive hybrid training, about 40 hours worth on TechNet. There's a link there under the Learn tab. So you can elect to view that and watch the videos. You can also download all of the presentations. And then we also encourage you to submit user voice feedback for SharePoint Server. So we're early enough from a development cycle to solicit your feedback, and providing we receive, a requisite number of votes, that may be an area that we want to invest in moving forward, or at least investigate. So be sure to provide feedback on where we could be doing better from either a server perspective, from a pure on-premises perspective, or if you'd like to see hybrid scenarios evolve that you may not have visibility into, or maybe we didn't disclose them at Ignite, you can continue to use user voice to tell us what gaps exist and how we can help you address those gaps with your customers. So with that said, I'll go ahead and conclude, turn it over to Q&A and wrap up. So thank you very much for attending today. It's been a great 48 minutes so far, and I look forward to answering your questions.
Great, Bill. Thanks so much. I appreciate the content today. Great information. And looks like we have a couple of questions that came in from the Q&A window, and I'll let you go ahead and address those.
Yeah, sure. I'll go ahead and start working through those now.
All right, super. And as Bill responds to questions, Bill, are you going to respond to questions verbally or just via text?
Yeah, I'm just going to go ahead and respond via the chat window for now. There's quite a few of them.
Okay.
So as opposed to reading out each one. One of the questions in particular was around the Delve space. I think we may have answered that one, but effectively our vision and strategy is that the Office graph should be able to extract signals. A signal is representative of an edge that exists between an actor and an object. An actor could be an individual. An object could be a file, for example. And the signal or the edge could be a number of different things. It could be the act of sharing that file with another actor. So you have a very distinct object, which is the file. You have an actor who owns the file, who shares that file with another actor, which establishes an edge or a signal. The signal could also be organizational structure. So from an organizational structure perspective, perhaps they're peers, perhaps they report to a common manager. So our intent is that we can extract those signals, those aspects of metadata from an on-premises file, process them by virtue of the Office graph, and then send the result back to the user through the Delve interface. So the content never leaves the on-prem boundary. We just extract the metadata through what we envision to be a new search application and then bring the experience back to the users. Another one is, does hybrid search require ADFS? So to answer that question, from a hybrid search perspective, you don't need to do ADFS. And in most cases, actually, my recommendation is to leverage directory synchronization with password sync. The key differentiator with that experience is, suppose you implement an outbound hybrid search, which means that you are searching from on-prem to Office 365. Your result set will be inclusive of both on-prem and online content. However, in the directory sync scenario, from a document preview perspective, document previews won't show up for the online content until that user authenticates. Because directory synchronization and password sync don't provide single sign-on, no authentication has occurred beyond search. So you won't get previews for that online content. You will for the on-prem content, but for online, you need to authenticate first. But the user is actually provided through the document flyout or through the preview window with that information. So it'll tell them that a document preview could not be provided because they've yet to authenticate. And then they can actually click on open the document, which authenticates them or prompts them for authentication. But you know, a really short answer to that question is no. To do hybrid search, you don't need ADFS. In most cases, I recommend directory synchronization and password sync. It provides a user experience that most users are amenable to, and it provides a very low barrier to entry. It can be implemented quickly. You know, in most cases, it's just a matter of a couple of hours of work versus weeks worth of infrastructure from an ADFS perspective. That, and it provides the foundation for ADFS anyway. So by the point that you elect to move to ADFS, at some point you're going to require directory synchronization. So it's definitely a good starting point. Most of my outbound hybrid search scenarios, I use directory synchronization and password sync. I don't use ADFS at all because it makes for a easier and more seamless solution. So that was just a couple of those questions that we've seen here. I'm looking at a couple of more. When moving to an intranet and extranet to a hybrid model, a good place to understand licensing requirements for SharePoint, SQL Server in Azure. So I'm more or less a licensing neophyte, so there's not much help that I can provide there. But if you look at the hybrid courseware that we published on TechNet, I believe the very first module, which is the overview module, module 1.1, provides some insight into hybrid. If it doesn't, and this is specifically for Jack, feel free to email me. I just published my email in the IM window with that question, and I can follow up with our licensing team. But the way I understand the licensing, and again, this is kind of my limited knowledge of how it works, is that your Office 365 comes with on-premises use rights. So they're licensed to use the on-premises software. And I think conversely, it's true as well. But definitely email me, and I'll be glad to help follow up with that question to provide you a better answer from somebody that knows. Another question is, what's the status of Share with OneDrive feature? That's in OA. So we're probably talking about the attachments capability that enables you to attach a file, but automatically upload that file to OneDrive for Business, effectively just sending a link and then auto permissioning based on the to and CC lines. So will that come to Outlook? That's a good question. That's one that I can't answer. So I'm just a SharePoint person. So I don't have that much insight into the Exchange and Outlook roadmap. Again, if you want to scroll up, find my email and email me, I can ask around our Exchange team and see if there's an answer that I can provide. Another question that just came in the last couple of minutes is that moving forward with the one-way outbound hybrid search. Okay, so this is around some tooling that we were working on. The good news there is the tooling's coming in 3 kind of separate or distinct releases. The first release was the assessment tool, to which there's a link in the back of the deck. You're more than welcome to download and use that tool. That provides insight into all of the considerations necessary prior to implementing a hybrid environment. The second stage of this tool is to incorporate that with a hybrid provisioning tool, or automating the provisioning process. So it kind of evolves from hybrid assessment to hybrid provisioning. And the third idea or tenet of this tool is to enable troubleshooting or mitigation of issues as they arise from a hybrid deployment perspective. The short answer to that question is phase 1 is available to you. We're actually going to publish phase 2 here in about the next 2 to 3 weeks leading up to Ignite, which is the programmatic configuration component. We'll likely drop that on GitHub sometime in either late March or early April leading into the Ignite event. So you'll go ahead, you'll be able to find that tool there, and we'll make sure that the link and its availability is broadcast so you'll have visibility into that. Otherwise, just ping me here in a couple of weeks and I'll let you know what the status is. Kind of moving through the questions here. Compliance requirements. From a compliance perspective, that's always a difficult one because most customers don't, they themselves don't know, what they're governed by, be it, corporate or regulatory. They generally, don't have any insight into that either. So, on the Office 365 side, the way that I look at it, if the customer does know what corporate or regulatory compliance requirements exist in their organization, I always direct those customers to our Trust Center and have them evaluate what they perceive or know that they need to have against what Office 365 supports. And that becomes kind of the foundational conversation about what content can and can't go to Office 365, which then leads you into how hybrid should be implemented, and how users should be educated on when and where to store data. If you look at the configuration of the assessment tool that I shared in the last slide, it actually prompts the customer to respond to some of those compliance requirements. Hybrid search, DirSync, and password sync sufficient. Will there be any advantage to using Azure AD Premium for SSO in place of ADFS in the future? I think from a hybrid SharePoint and Office 365 perspective, it's one of those things that we've been looking at over time. So it's one of those, tenets that we've been constantly investigating. So to deliver a better hybrid experience, do we put all of our eggs in the ADFS SSO basket? Or, do we look at something like Azure AD Premium for SSO? Those are still some open questions on our end. Obviously, it changes from a few of the things that we do from an infrastructure perspective, whether or not we support it or not, and the plumbing, what plumbing changes are required on our end, or what opportunities exist, and then validation with the existing scenarios. There's a lot of work to be done in that space. Hopefully by the time we get to Ignite in May, we'll have a very clear roadmap for both hybrid as well as the detailed investments. So, we'll be able to tell you exactly which hybrid scenarios we anticipate investing in, what those scenarios are going to look like. I can tell you today, it's not just going to be search and OneDrive for Business or Yammer. We've pretty much got an open book when it comes to hybrid scenarios. We're hyper focused on making sure that we get them right. We're focused on that idea of enriching traditional investments, and by the time we get to Ignite, we'll be able to spell out in detail, what does that look like. But I can tell you it's going to be a substantial number of things that span compliance to team sites, extranets, search. There's going to be a number of different ways that we look at hybrid, and we're still strategizing what those look like. By the time we get there, we'll be able to share that more clearly. And that got me down to kind of the end of the questions. It's 10 o'clock on the hour, so unfortunately it looks like we've met time. For anybody that has any follow-up questions, please feel free to email me.
All right, thank you, Bill. I have added a link to a short survey in the conversation window, so if you could please take a moment to access that prior to logging out today, we'd greatly appreciate your feedback. The survey scores are on a scale from 1 to 5, with 5 being the highest score possible. So please take that into account while you're completing that survey. Thank you very much. And with that, that does conclude the audio portion of today's Infopedia Partner Web Conference. Partners, you can access the meeting replay on worldwide events within 24 hours. And lastly, I'd like to extend a great big thank you to our presenters, Bill and Michael, and thank you, audience, for logging in and joining us. Have a great day.